Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Ask Evoke podcast. This is the April edition, April of 2025. We're going to be using a slightly different format to our previous Ask Evoke podcast. Today, I, Scott Johnston, am joined by Evoke coach Leif Godberson to tackle this month's questions. There are an awful lot of questions this month, and we'll do our best to get to all of them. But we're not going to hurry through. And if we don't get all of them done in an hour or so, we will just shovel them over to next month. That's about all we can do. Our voices might not hold out for much more than an hour. And so, and also, if you like the content that we're providing at Evoke, please share this with friends and associates. Okay, Leif, we got a couple of questions here that I'm going to tackle before handing it over to you. Welcome, by the way. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah.
So we'll
So,
start with our
yeah, first
first
question.
question here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this one's from Anders, and the question reads, Hi, thanks for a great informative podcast. In the February Q&A, you discussed high rep versus max strength core routines. It left me with a big question. I am an amateur cross-country skier. I participate in the Vasalopp at 90K, double pulling most of the race. In the train up, I do a muscular endurance circuit once a week, 10 by 10 reps of 4 to 5 exercises. And then in brackets, we've got triceps, lats, cores, hips. However, from the podcast, I understand that core should not be trained this way. Could you clarify, and how do you suggest an ME workout for a race like this should be designed?
Okay, this is a great question, and we've had it, I think, even before. You can definitely train muscular, core like through a circuit and develop muscular endurance in your core. But the reason I advocate for more of a max strength effort with core exercise to lay a foundation of strength is these muscles, some of them are very hard to engage, like the transverse abdominis. They're difficult, challenging for many people to even be able to flex that muscle, as opposed to something like the six pack muscles. But they're also primarily slow twitch because they're generally designed for stabilization of our, between your hips and your ribs. And so they're not as strong as, you might think. Well, some people, of course, could have very strong core, but what I believe helps is to first do a few weeks of this sort of max strength protocol. So, you're almost going to failure, but with enough resistance that in the isometric exercises, maybe you can hold for like 10 or 15 seconds. Same thing with it'd be low reps if you're doing an exercise that involves repetitions, then it would be low reps with high resistance. And by low reps, I mean, in the range of 4 to 5, and high resistance means that you could maybe squeak out a sixth rep there, but not any more than that. And I think if you do that before you go into more like a circuit workout, you're going to be stronger when you start it, and I think it's going to be more effective for you. But that doesn't mean it's the only way to do it. There are plenty of people who just do core work using more of a muscular endurance type protocol. Um, and the other question you have with regarding to ME workout for a race like this, clearly, I mean, in the old days, what I would have done, and I did race the Vasaloppet many, many, many years ago, but is to that you definitely need to be doing. I mean, if you have a rollerboard, or a ski-erg of some kind, but even better, I think, is a rollerboard. And they're an ancient tool. It's basically a slanted board with a little cart that you sit on, and then ropes up that are attached to the wall up above, and you pull on them to raise yourself up the track and the board that's slanted. Then you roll, gravity pulls you back down. And we used to do a ton of rollerboarding in the summertime. And you can adjust the angle so you can make some of the workouts more strengthy and others more endurancey. But I think that might be something to consider. That not all gyms are going to have something like that, but maybe you even live in Sweden, and there I'm sure people have rollerboards. But if they don't, then a ski-erg can be a pretty good tool for you as well. I would definitely plan on especially as you get close to the racing season, some very specific high rep muscular endurance double pulling workouts on a ski-erg. One of the favorites I've had is like our what I call 30-30s. So you're going to be going pretty much as hard as you can for 30 seconds, then very light for 30 seconds. Then you do that for, maybe you start with 2 by 10 minutes and you work up to, 1 by 30 or 1 by 40 minutes. Um, so anyway, that's it. Any thoughts on that, Leif?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I think one thought is because this can come up kind of often, but for people not to totally decouple max strength and endurance, muscular endurance, and having a higher maximal strength is going to mean that you're also pushing up what you can endure, right? So
Yeah,
they're not mutually exclusive. Um, yeah.
good point. Yep. Um, okay, I'll move on to the next one.
Okay,
Um,
so our
this is from Zach, right?
So Zach asks, I am mainly a CrossFit and strength athlete who is in the early stages of building aerobic capacity and fixing my ADS. I am moving from sea level to Colorado Springs, around 6,500 feet. I am planning on doing most of my cardio on trails, which will have elevation gain. I am almost certain I won't be able to maintain a zone 2 heart rate at elevation with incline. Would you recommend I just run as slow as possible until my fitness catches up and I'm able to run in zone 2 at elevation, even if most of my cardio sessions end up being in Z3/4?
Well, you don't want that last bit. You don't want to have most of your training being done in zone 3 or 4. So what I would recommend, first, you're going to have to allow your body some time to acclimate, especially if you're coming from as low as sea level. So acclimating to 6,500 feet, you're probably going to take 2 to 4 weeks to start really feeling like, okay, I'm breathing better. But and so during that time, I would keep everything low intensity, like down even in, it means walking, you're going to need to walk. Eventually you'll get to where you can run, but if there's an incline, depending on how steep it is, you can't run it, then there's nothing at all wrong with walking that hill to stay in zone 2 or even below if needed. But I think that one of the mistakes that people make, and I think there's another question like this later on that we should be able to get to today, that is like how much of their aerobic base training can be done above aerobic threshold before it starts to have a negative impact. And most of us, when we go out for a run, yeah, our heart rate's going to go up into zone 3 or something when we're going uphill. But I like to think of keeping the total time in that, above aerobic threshold at less than 10% of the whole training session. And the rationale for that is two reasons. One is if you are aerobically deficient, which this person, or Zach, says he is, then you need to concentrate on fixing that problem first before you just go straight ahead into higher intensity. And the reason that's true is this zone 2 training that we talk so much about and that is in vogue now for people to speak about, is it's designed to establish a base of training. Now, you being a strength athlete, you probably understand this. You need to have a certain base of strength before you can do more advanced moves, or you're not going to start with heavy deadlifts if you've never lifted before. So you wanted to have a base of strength to build off of. And it's just the same thing as true on the endurance side. You want to have a base, and that base is the aerobic capacity that you can then layer on higher intensity stuff as it is needed. But the reason it can set you back is that when you are in zone 3 and especially in zone 4, your body is producing quite a lot of lactate. And we've got a ton of information on lactate training on the website. But this, and it's all at the same time, it's producing associated with that. People have heard the term lactic acid, but lactic being an acid, it's water soluble. So as soon as it hits, an aqueous area, like in the blood plasma or even in the cells themselves, it dissociates into a lactate molecule and a hydrogen ion, the acid part. And the accumulation of hydrogen ions causes a downregulation of what's called the AMPK pathway. That's the pathway that builds aerobic capacity. That's the pathway that makes more mitochondria. So by doing high intensity training at a time when you're trying to just build this aerobic base, you run the risk, especially if most of, like in this case, most of your cardio sessions, you will actually regress in base building. You won't be able to, yeah, you won't get any better, honestly. You can't shortchange this by just doing, like, and as you well know, Leif, a 2-hour easy run can't be substituted by, 45 minutes of intervals. They're not the same thing. They do different things.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think one thought on this too might be just from experience that trying to do a zone 3-4 session at altitude if you're not acclimated will be potentially incredibly difficult anyway. So this might be somewhat self-regulating because for many people when they go up to altitude, it's just simply not possible to do that kind of intensity.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, the acclimatization is important for sure.
Mhm.
And you might need to readjust your zones for the new altitude. That's something I haven't talked. I've mentioned it in the past, but I'll reiterate it
Yeah.
now. Is you need to have your zones set for the altitude or altitudes that you train at. So let's say you live in Boulder, Colorado at 5,500 feet. Well, it's fine to do, an aerobic threshold test or determine your zones some way
Mm.
at that elevation. But then, on the weekends, you're up at 10, 11,000 feet. Well, you need to have done another aerobic threshold test at at similar elevations you train at in order to have the zones be correct, because you will see the zones move down significantly as you go in heart rate as you go up in altitude.
Mhm. Yeah. I guess one more thought on this too, actually, it's something that I've come back to a few times that can be useful with this scenario is if you do plan the intensity that you're going to do, so say you're going to do one workout a week, is just make that potentially some sort of a running workout so that if you're worried about maintaining things like running economy and that, or kind of keeping the leg speed up. Just simply make that your intensity rather than doing some intensity on an incline or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Starting out, adding intensity. You want to not add more intensity into your training than what might cause you to drop the overall volume by, something in the
Mm,
range of 5 or 10%. If you needed to drop your volume by 50% because you're beginning to add intensity, then you're probably adding too much
mm,
intensity or too high an intensity level, because maintaining that volume is really key for endurance.
mhm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah. Okay, the next question I'm going to hand over to Leif is one that came in, and I'll read it off, but we have two great answers here by our
Mm,
two best alpinist coaches who answered these. And so the first one is going to be Seth's answer, and then I'll let Leif have his own answer. So the question is dry tooling training the same as ice climbing training?
So I'll read Seth's answer because he left us a good answer for this one. So Seth says, yeah, in some ways, yes, but in most ways, no. Ultimately, the steeper one desires to dry tool, the more upper body muscular endurance and body tension one should focus on training. Dry tooling on steeper terrain, then about 15 degrees overhanging and sporting slippery holds and or big spans between holds imparts much greater demands on the upper body compared to 99% of pure ice routes, and the training should reflect as such. If training for such steep routes, there should be more training volume involving isometric arm positions, improving critical force in the upper body, and very long core focused workouts that use specific core exercises. Some examples like leg raises, hanging from tools. Above all, dry tooling is very unique in terms of its blend of technique and power, as well as the specific medium, limestone versus granite, etc. That actual dry tooling is imperative to do a lot. So that was a great answer from Seth. I think that all makes a lot of sense. Um, the only thing I would maybe parse into that further would to think about uh, what how you're defining dry tooling. So there's a pretty big spectrum within just that discipline. So whether you're more into uh, mountainous kind of chaussee vertical climbing that's going to have a lot more of skatey holds, climbing with a pack, essentially where you'll be spending a lot more time on a lead. You could easily spend an hour in comparison to harder dry tooling. So when you're getting well into the double digits and you're looking at horizontal roofs or even competition dry tooling, where you're going to just need a lot more power to simply execute the specific moves. Um, you still could be on the route for a fairly long time, of course, but in general, when you're climbing at, higher standard, you might also need to simply climb faster. That might be a big piece of that. Um, so yeah, kind of a loaded question, but hopefully that helps a bit.
Yeah. I mean, my dry tooling has only been in the alpine area, nothing like crazy overhanging like is being done today. And I know you spent a week or so with a couple of the best dry toolers in the world just recently. And what were some of the observations that you noticed when you were climbing with them?
Yeah, again, I think it's just uh, a big thing is the speed. Again, like thinking about how you're climbing, right? Uh if you're on-sighting at a crag, you can afford to take a big risk as far as throwing for holds and that. And if you fall, it's completely safe. It's bolted climbing. So the style in which you climb is a big thing. Um, Even learning how to take holds is going to be a huge other aspect of again harder climbing. If you're getting into competition climbing, then even putting significant time into learning the different holds that are out there that exist is going to be a huge part of that. Um, but in my experience, spending time with some very capable dry toolers, I think a big part is how fast they can execute on a route. They can, observe what, where they're hopefully going to be, or how they're going to execute on the route, and then just with speed, because sometimes it's not going to be possible to hang on for forever.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
I mean, you
Um,
can hang on forever if it's just from a bar, but yeah, when the moves become the crux in themselves, it kind of changes the game a little bit more so.
sure, I can definitely imagine that. All
Yeah.
right. Well, thanks for that answer or answers.
All right. Shall I read you a
Yeah,
question here,
let's
Scott?
in the next one. Let's jump to the next one.
So this one we've got from Alex. I know you guys at Evoke Endurance have lots of mountaineering and probably hiking experience, so I figured it would be smart to email you about this. I'm looking for a hike snack. Most options I've tried are full of processed ingredients and lead to a quick sugar spike and a crash. So I was wondering if you have any tips. What do you guys mostly use when you're out there in the wild, particularly when it comes to the longer days?
Yeah. Well, I know that because I'm kind of slowing down a lot in my old age. I spend a lot more time moving slowly in the mountains than I do running. And so I find that I can eat, you could have a ham sandwich and be fine because your stomach's not going to get upset. Whereas if you were running, you might, the reason all these highly processed sugary drinks and gels and bars have been invented is you're not going to you can't just load up your stomach with a ham sandwich if you're trying to run. And especially if you're running a long distance, it seems like it really begins to bother people after several hours. So I think the fact that you're mostly hiking, it would tell me that almost anything, the things you like to eat. I mean, maybe last night, a couple pieces of last night's pizza. Um, or I've even gone so far as when I didn't, I'm going for a big hike, and probably run a little bit, but I might be doing mostly hiking up high in the mountains. I will I've stopped by the local grocery store and just go in and buy one of their little French bread hoagie sandwiches, with meat and cheese and lettuce, and put the mustard on it. And I found that stuff to be great. You don't get the quick sugar spike, but I'm not sure that with the low intensity of my rationale for the way I'm doing this is that if you're running, you're going to be burning a lot more glycogen than if you're hiking. And so you need to be able to replace that glycogen and replace it pretty quickly. Um, so that's where these, very sugary, and it's different kinds of sugar. I'm not trying to say sugary is bad. I'm just saying that these things that have a lot of carbohydrate in them, and it's mainly glucose or sucrose and fructose are the sugars that are in them. But the reason for that is they pack a lot of punch for somebody who needs that kind of, let's say those sort of calories. But with hiking, I believe most of the time, unless you're really working hard, you're going to be spending most of your efforts, most of your fueling needs will be met by fat. And so I think you're not getting into quite the glycogen depletion. Um, and I think that, Leif, I'm going to also ask you to tell me what you think. But mountaineering or alpinism often involves a lot of hiking. In fact, you might spend more time getting to the objective than actually climbing the objective. And so, Leif, you've got a wealth of experience in that area. What are some of your go-to things, and do you eat differently when you're hiking or versus when you're, let's say, on the climb and pushing things harder?
Mm. Yeah, I think well, first off, I think it's always useful to think about like your daily caloric intake as a whole rather than just isolating from the activity. So, I mean, depending on what the activity is maybe just eating well before and after, if it's that low intensity, could be sufficient. If it's going to be just a long day out, like you, I'd be more inclined to just bring like a sandwich or, like some Nutella sandwich or something like that. Um, of course, if it's any more intensity, then of course I'm more likely to go with like a drink mix, something of that nature. Um, I do also think an important point is to just make sure whatever you're going to bring, you're going to eat it and you enjoy eating it because it doesn't matter how optimal something is. If you don't enjoy it, then you probably won't use it. So yeah, not a super concise answer, but hopefully that's useful.
I think experimentation, you just got to try
Yeah.
different things. Um,
Hmm.
okay, the next question is from Rory, and it says, thanks for all the help you provide, podcasts and books. I have grown a lot reading and listening over the past 5 years. I live in the Colorado Front Range, and I'm currently training for a late summer objective that will involve a multi-day effort of multiple 14ers and parts of the Colorado Trail. This will be a mix of fast hiking and running and likely will occur in late August. But for the entirety of July, I will be at sea level in a hot and humid environment for work. I will have access to gyms throughout the week and trails on the weekends with elevations up to 5,000 feet. how should I approach this time knowing that it is so close to my objective, but I will have about 2 to 3 weeks back at altitude prior to my planned objective.
Well, I think, my thought would just initially be that in July, that would be a good time to focus on getting your, maybe your peak volume and the overall training load up, provided you have the bandwidth capacity to do so. And then as you come back, you transition into that, what was it? Was it 3 weeks or yeah, 2 to 3 weeks
Two
to
to
be at
three weeks.
altitude?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, at that point, I wouldn't be pushing your training volume anymore. I'd probably even be maybe cutting it back a little bit, tapering it. But I would be trying to spend as much time as possible at that point at altitude, and that would work out quite well to acclimate prior um, to your kind of objective coming up in late August. Maybe even, I mean, it's probably there's a real cap on this, but if you're in a really hot place, maybe you get some slight benefits from heat training, just in terms of right, increasing your blood plasma, and then that can in turn drive a slight increase in hemoglobin mass. But with that in mind, I mean, this can take months, many months of heat training to see those kinds of benefits. So that's more unlikely. So yeah, so I think, peak at your training volume while you're lower down, and then as you transition to altitude, taper back on your training and just focus on acclimatizing. What do you think, Scott? Anything to add to that?
During the time you're at this hot, humid environment, hopefully you have access to a gym that has air conditioning. Um, that would be a nice thing because you could then be focused on, you could be doing some machine workouts like hiking on a steep incline treadmill or Stairmaster, something like that. So it's going to be pretty time efficient. I mean, an hour on a stair machine is a brutal training session with or without adding extra weight. So I found those kind of things to be very effective, especially for people that are time crunched. So I would be not only be thinking about, if you're constrained a little bit on time, not only would I would probably prioritize, you know, this kind of muscular endurance sort of work that we have shown to be so effective for mountain athletes to have. But if you can do a high volume, then by all means do it. And I totally agree with Leif on the heat training. I think that could really benefit you of training in the heat. That will increase the blood plasma, and that can be an advantage when you get back to altitude. And this fellow Rory had a bunch of other questions and comments, and um, they're very detailed and very specific to him. Now, we I don't think we even have time today to go into all of these, but if you've got like super detailed questions and wanting to review your training, what your training history has been, or what you should be doing going in the future, then probably the simplest or the best way to get that information is to set up a phone consultation with one of us. We do offer those, and they're easy to sign up for on the website. But then we could go down into the weeds on each person's particular. But I don't think we can. If we do the rest of we've done the rest of the podcast will be taken up by answering all these other or addressing all these other issues with Rory. So I think we got to move on to Micah.
Okay, so Micah had a fair bit of background on his as well, but I will go ahead and read the questions here. So his first question was, if repeatedly needing early recovery weeks, should one step back training volume? For example, if currently training 9 hours of running a week, but not able to hold that volume for more than a week or two, rather than continuing to build volume, should I reduce volume to 7 hours a week and slowly build from there? Do you want to start with that, Scott?
Yes, I think that's probably the most generally applicable type of question. And I would say, yeah, if you're struggling to do 9 hours a week, then clearly you haven't adapted to that load yet. And so reducing that to 7 would probably be a smart move. The other thought is there's nothing wrong with having, you know, a big week followed by an easier week. I mean, we often program, 3 building weeks followed by a recovery week afterwards, but that's not cast in stone. We don't necessarily have to do it that way. It might be that you can do 2 hours, it's 2 weeks at 7 hours, and then you need to drop down to, like 4 or something for the recovery week. The most important thing in that recovery week, whichever kind of, whether you're doing what you're doing now, sticking with 9 hours and then holding and then having a recovery week, that's fine, but make sure that in the recovery week, you actually get recovered so that when you start training again on the next building block, you will be fresh and rested. And what I often tell people is let's say if you're doing your weeks from, Monday to Sunday, by the time the weekend comes around, you should start to be getting kind of itchy and anxious to train again. You should start to feel your energy really come back up. And if it isn't, then you may not have rested enough and you might even need more time than that. So I'd say there's two options here. Just do a 9 hour week and have a rest week or easy week, or try, see if you can get 2 or 3 7-hour weeks in a row before you need a rest week. But I think that either one of those is going to, as long as you're recovering between these weeks, I think either one of these approaches will work.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think also considering because just how long it's been that you've been trying to hold this 9 hours a week of running, if this has been years or on the order of weeks, um, would kind of be good to consider. And if it's just been a few weeks, like to your point, Scott, it probably just need a proper recovery week to come back and train again. Um, yeah, so maybe I'll just quickly go into the second question here. With an eye towards multi-year goals, does it make sense to push volume well past what is needed for this year's races to build a better foundation to train from long frame? I think it's not quite worded right here, for longer races next year. My pace is embarrassingly slow, so I'm not worried about getting a competitive time, only finishing.
Um, well, if you're, hitting 9 hours a week currently, and that's a struggle for you, um, I would say, one of the things, a very crude rule of thumb that I like to use is that if you can't do in a week what you plan to do, I mean, if you can't handle the training load if within 7 days of what you're going to want to do during your event, then, if you're training for a race that's going to take more than 9 hours, then you're probably needing to increase that training volume, even if it means slowing down. Especially in these ultra long running races, there can be, depending on how hilly they are, a lot of time spent hiking. And so don't, forget about hiking. It's not just about running. I looked at, last year, woman I coached, Ruth Croft from New Zealand, she was second at the UTMB. And looking at her race during the UTMB, she probably spent almost 40% of the 110 miles walking because it's too steep to run. So don't forget to practice that. The other thing I think that can go a long way towards people that are somewhat time constrained or can't quite handle that heavy training load is give yourself a block of 6 to 8 weeks of muscular endurance training. And that the program that we have, it's in the books and it's on the website for free, will lay out everything you're going to be doing for, I think that it goes 9 or 10 weeks long, but you get at least 6 weeks of that in, and I think you're going to be a lot better place to handle the 9 hours of running.
Yep, I
Um,
don't think I have
oh, go ahead.
anything to add to that one. Should we go on to
Yeah, this
Catherine?
is another case, Micah, where I would love to have a chance to talk to you, but all of these questions are very specific to you personally, and I'd suggest if you're really interested in digging into these things, you get in touch with one of us for a phone consultation. Okay, the next question is from Catherine. We love this kind of thing when people say this. I love your podcast. I listen frequently. I'm primarily a Nordic skier competing in races from 10 to 50 kilometers in the winter. I consistently do 1 to 2 strength workouts per week and train about 12 to 15 hours per week. I'm now transitioning into trail running season. I have about 4 races this summer between 20 and 50K with varying amounts of vertical. I live in Alberta, so I'm close to the mountains. I also like to increase strength in my off season doing CrossFit for intensity. My question is, what is better? A block style training where you first have a base building period with ME baked into it, um, or either ME or 2 CrossFit during that base training 3 to 4 times a week. Then your race specific training layered on top of that. So yeah, go ahead and
Yeah,
see I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
sure. I, I think the first thing that would stand out to me is what the intention is behind uh, the increasing of strength training in the off season. I think for sure it does make a lot of sense to do a heavier period of strength training in an off season. That's very logical. I'm not sure CrossFit would be the optimal way to get the benefits of strength training, especially as it doesn't sound like a true off season. You are doing some trail races. So if you're looking to work in intensity, uh, it would be a lot better value to be doing some specific running uphill intensity uh, rather than CrossFit. Um, and you could still get the benefits of strength training by doing more of a program focused on heavier lifting, lower reps, heavier moving, heavier weights, long rest periods, that kind of stuff. And it likely wouldn't be as taxing if you do these, really intensive workouts like CrossFit, for example. Uh, it'll make you, for one, just simply very tired, and a lot of it can kind of be random movements that may not even be applicable to your sports. And then I think just to touch on the ME part in there too, I think there's obviously a ton of value in doing a block of muscular endurance training, but again, I think it makes a lot of sense to take your off season and maybe do some more maximal style um, strength training before going into muscular endurance because you likely don't want to be doing that year round either. Um, yeah, I think that would kind of suffice my answer on that. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, I'm going to dive into the rationale behind or why you're suggesting a max strength or a heavy weight, low repetition protocol versus CrossFit. That is that CrossFit is intentionally very metabolically demanding. And as a consequence, it can have a very high global fatigue load associated with it that may very well impact the training volume you can handle. And as Leif said, I believe that you should be doing your intensity in a very sport specific way. So that's going to probably mean uphill, running or hiking with a weight or something like that. Um, Whereas when you do this max strength training that Leif is talking about, where it's not very metabolically demanding because the volume is quite low, but the resistance is very high. So you'll build a lot of strength without the kind of this sort of global fatigue load that often comes with high intensity interval style training like CrossFit. And then I would be thinking about something that's a little more sport specific type muscular endurance, which could be that the gym muscular endurance workout. And what I would say in your base period, you should have one ME workout and one max strength workout in a week. that would be plenty. To, like, doing CrossFit twice a week plus an ME workout, or then trying to get a high volume. I don't think that's going to work out well. And then the other thing is that when I first read this question, my thought was, okay, you've got several races you want to do over the summer. How much time is there between these things? So if your goal is to build a base for, the ski season coming up, then just racing a lot and not having time to really train between, because let's say you do a big race and it takes you a week or more to recover from it, but you've only got 3 weeks to your next race, and you're going to need a week of tapering probably going into that next race. That only leaves about a week in between these races to actually get some training in. And that what will happen with that is you will begin to, your base fitness will slide, will drop off. There was a Since you're a cross country skier, you almost undoubtedly know the name Gunde Svan. Gunde Svan was a Swedish skier who, in 1987, he won every single World Cup race. He had like twice the number of points as the next place person. And as a young skier myself at the time, I would absorb anything I could that this guy was talking about with regards to training, as I was trying to figure out how to train. And one of the things that he said that's always stuck with me is, once the racing starts, the training is over. So you better have, what that means is, you better have built up a really substantial bank account, fitness bank account, before you start racing. Now, as you probably are well aware, going into a World Cup season where they might be racing 30 or 40 times over the course of 4 or 5 months, that's probably different than doing, three ultra runs over the course of, 4 or 5 months. But I still think the general idea holds that, the your training base needs to be there before you start racing. Because once you start racing, it's very hard to maintain and almost impossible to build between races unless you have, 2 months between races. So that's kind of long-winded, sorry. Um,
No, I think that's a great background into the question. I think always, my only other thought on this would be, and with many of these questions, is just really thinking about what the intention is of why you're adding something into the program, because everything you put into the program is going to have some cost, right? And we don't want to put anything in that isn't going to have some real payback. So yeah, just kind of always keeping that in mind.
Yeah, and one last thought on this is, sounds like your primary goal is to be competitive in cross country ski races. And in that case, I would make sure you're getting in lots of upper body, first strength, max strength work, then followed by upper body muscular endurance work leading into that ski season. It will be really beneficial, let's say, in a skating race, when you can, what do you call V2 in Canada, Leif? I've forgotten.
I think we
Offset,
call
or
it V2.
you do call it? Oh, used to not. Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. We're all using
Yeah.
the same language now. That's helpful. So the V2 or even V2 alternate requires a lot of upper body strength, and muscular endurance. So I would say that's something I would include in my off-season training, is upper body work.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. Okay, well, move on to the next one here. So this one is from Sarah, longtime fan here. I've been following the principles in training for the new alpinism to train for mountaineering for the last 3+ years with great results. I'm planning to climb Gannett Peak and Pico de Orzaba later this year. I'm getting back into training after a few months of maintenance, strength, jogging during alpine ski season. I'm following the Gym ME progression on your website. I completed week 2 last week, but I rolled my ankle after taking a bad step. It feels fine doing squats, lunges, box steps, etc., but jumping is out for the time being. So the question is, do you have any suggestions for non-jumping exercise substitutions for the split jump squats and squat jumps? I was thinking Bulgarian split squats and goblet squats while keeping the same rest periods, but wanted to hear your thoughts as well. Scott, what do you think about this one?
Well, I think she's nailed it. Now, those are the things I would suggest is the Bulgarian split squat as a substitute for the squat jumps. Goblet squats would be fine as well. And if you're able to handle the load, even back squats, I think, could be good, or front squats too. I think the front squats are probably a little more of an athletic position. I mean, the weightlifting squat is not a position we normally find our bodies in. So, and what I've done for alpine skiers or high mountain, a lot of like extreme skiers, what I've worked with them is a muscular endurance routine that is based on quarter squats, quarter to half squats. So, half squat meaning your thigh is going to be roughly parallel to the ground. Quarter squat is maybe 45 degrees steeper than that, and you're only dropping down 1/4 of the full length that you would be dropping to into a full squat. But that's a very specific type of muscular endurance training for downhill skiing. But it might be a good substitute for your for the squat jumps. But either that or the goblet squat jump. The goblet squats are fine. You understand, I think, very well what you're needing here.
Mhm. But the only thing I would add to that is maybe even just consider based on your goals to maybe even just do a muscular endurance workout on a stair machine.
Mhm.
Um, and then you don't even have to worry about, you can just be, a bit more specific with that and don't have to worry about loading it up as much.
Well, that's a really good point. And now that I'm going back and rereading the first part of this question, where the main climbs are Gannett Peak, which is in Wyoming. It's the highest peak in Wyoming, and then Pico de Orizaba, which is I don't know, 16, 17,000 or something. I can't remember exactly. I climbed it back in like 1971 or two, so I can't. My memory doesn't go back that far, but both of those are essentially, hiking slowly uphill with a heavy pack. And that, you might want to go through a few weeks, like 6, 8 weeks of this gym ME progression, and then switch over to what Leif suggested, which is get on a stair machine and put a pack on. Maybe not the first couple of times you do it because the stair machine itself is really hard. But later you can start adding some weight into that pack, and then you're going to get a very specific type of muscular endurance work for hiking uphill. Okay.
Should we go on to
Yeah.
Johnny's question here?
Johnny's question. Wait, did I read that last one or did you? I forgot. Um,
I think I read that
you
one,
read
the
that.
last
Okay,
one.
I will read this
Yeah.
one. Here's one from Johnny. And Johnny, if you're listening to this, this one is labeled question number 2. Well, we can't find a question number 1 anywhere. I've looked all over in our email and social media. So um, if forgive us for not being able to answer that part. And if you want to resubmit that, that's great. So your question is combining hill sprints and longer hill reps. I understand the benefit of hill sprints year round, but I'm curious about whether for shorter, fast races, doing some longer hill reps as part of the same session could be a good idea. As per previous message, I structure the year into 3 phases: off season, preseason, race season. Was thinking something like this. In the off season, he would do hill sprints, 12 reps of hill sprints with an additional 4 by 1 minute uphill reps after that. Preseason, he drops down to 8 hill sprints in the workout, followed by 6 by 1 minute uphill. And then the race season, he drops down to 6 by hill sprints, but 8 times 1 minute uphill. So, any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think definitely the hill sprints do have a lot of value, and keeping them in year round is worthwhile. Even modulating them depending if you need some more leg speed into some flat sprints could make sense if you are doing these year round. I would suggest that for sure, I think you can in some situations pair the sprints into another workout or on the same day. That can work fine. Of course, you need to make sure you're doing the sprints fresh, fully rested up, and you definitely don't want to do those after doing a more intensive workout. I think even you know, like keeping it concise at your warm up to the point and then getting straight into the sprints is very important. Afterwards, you can add in some more intensity, but I would likely be more inclined to suggest longer intervals or pairing this with some sort of a muscular endurance, whether it's more specific uphill running or something like that. Um, 1 minute intervals are pretty intensive, and I'm not sure how much value you'll not necessarily get out of that. Like you might get a lot more return out of longer intervals. Um, Training things like VO2 max, I mean, there's very little room to push that up. And again, it's just very taxing. So it could, compromise kind of the week as a whole for kind of what you put into it. Um, yeah, what do you think, Scott?
Yeah, I think the only, maybe add a couple things. One is that in the race season, doing hill sprints plus 8 by 1 minute, and maybe he's thinking
Mm.
these are not done in the same workout. They're different
Yeah, yeah,
workouts. And but that either way, it doesn't, the answer would be the same.
yeah.
Doing 8 by 1 minute in the middle of race season could be tough depending on how many races you're doing, because you might not have the energy between races to do something that's that hard. One of the reasons we like hill sprints year round is like we were just talking about a moment ago with max strength, they're not particularly metabolically demanding. They're taxing on the nervous system for sure, but not so much metabolically. So recovery is pretty quick. And it also means that you're not conflicting. So you're not adding because most of your endurance training is just a metabolic training. But when you add a high intensity workout like, 8 by 1 minute, or even going a bit longer, up to 8 by 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, that's metabolically very taxing, and it could very well, like you said earlier, impact the rest of the week's training. So I'm minimally interested in, or minimally excited by, and I used to use this kind of training um, for myself and with skiers in the past. I know I think that the 1 minute intensity, or even up to 2 or 3 minutes, 4 minutes, in this, as hard as you can go for 4 minutes, which obviously isn't going to be as hard as you can go for 1 minute, but both of them they're long enough that they become aerobic and metabolically taxing. But even working with cross country ski sprinters whose event is 4 minutes long, we almost never did. Maybe in a peaking period leading into national championships or something, we might do a couple of workouts where there are, several hard, up to, 1 minute long intervals up a steep hill. We found much more benefit to work in what we would call zone 3, where you can handle a much higher volume of that than you would, when you start adding in zone 4 type intensity. And I would say a 1 minute interval is going to qualify as zone 4. Um, so maybe you're doing very short races. I don't know, but I would point out that even for sprinters at the World Cup level, cross country sprinters, that is the 4 minute event, even for them, we did very little of this kind of intensity. I just don't think, like Leif said earlier, it the fatigue the versus reward balance is not great.
Mm. Yeah, and then I think to your point, just to reiterate, I think how many races are you doing and what does the race season look like? Because yeah, I didn't read it that way initially, but if you're racing frequently, as to your earlier point, Scott, I mean, you're not going to be getting any real training in between those periods. So,
Yeah,
um,
for sure.
okay, so our next question here is, do you have any recommendations for recovery after Ranger school. And I think we got an answer from Vince, one of our coaches, very
Yeah.
experienced in this area.
Yes, we've got another question that was answered by one of our other coaches who's an expert in that area. We'll get to still, but I contacted Vince, who's been an Evoke coach for several years. Vince won the Best Ranger competition in 2022, I believe, 21 or 22. So he's a lot of experience with this kind of stuff. So I'm going to just read what Vince sent me. Um, First, you need to recover your sleep cycle. Too often, guys come out of the school and try to get back into high levels of training, but their circadian rhythm is all messed up from school. You have to be able to sleep through the night, and you should be sleeping 8 to 9 hours through the night before you start training again. Remember that rushing back will just extend the amount of time it takes to get you back to a natural sleep rhythm, and by delay and will delay that time. And by delaying that time, you'll just be delaying when you can get back to more serious training. But I would not recommend that I would say, for instance, take your time to recover the calories lost and but you should instead prioritize eating healthy over just eating to gain your weight back. Do you want the weight that you're gaining back to be sustainable, to be healthy, and to be additive to high performance? Third, my rule of thumb was always no major training for 30 days after Ranger School, and then for 30 days, keeping a lighter training rhythm as you start building back into things. Give yourself a day for every day you were in the school and get back in order to get back to where you were when you went into the school. Don't expect it to happen in 30 days. The body won't be ready for it. Start mileage over and slowly rebuild the strength and muscular system likely lost through days of caloric deficiency. Um, Finally, we often would put guys on a separate PT plan for the first 30 days and then another 30 days of light work, not expecting them to do what the group is doing. It takes a step back for your ego, but it will be able to, if you're able to do that, it'd definitely be the right decision for the long term. So thank you, Vince. This is something I totally agree with everything he said there from what little I know about Ranger School. Yeah, the weight loss is significant and sleep deprivation is massive. So I think these are good points but yeah, don't get back into training too quickly.
Mhm. Scott, do you want me to read the next one here? You did a lot of reading on that answer.
Yeah, go ahead if you want.
Yeah.
Want me to
So this
ask
one
the
is,
question or okay, you go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, I can read this one. It's
Yep.
just love the pod and appreciate you taking the time to document each question in chapters. Makes it incredibly useful when going back to listen to previous episodes. My question is, if I do a 60-minute zone 2 effort, then finish with 8 20 to 30-second pickups to gain some anaerobic benefit, does this negate the aerobic base work, or can it truly be a complement when I get both aerobic and anaerobic adaptations? Another question on it. Am I sacrificing aerobic gains by doing this type of workout once a week? Yeah, what are your thoughts
Yeah,
on
I would
this
say no,
one?
you're not sacrificing it.
Yeah.
But I think you should get the notion that this is anaerobic training out of your brain for a minute. And here's why. This, what I think strides or pickups should or could be is to add muscular load. So it's more like doing a strength workout as opposed to some maximally hard sprint for 30 seconds, then where you're, bent over double with your hands on your knees trying to regain your breath. That is anaerobic training, but I don't think there's much benefit, as we've talked about just a little bit ago. I don't think there's a lot of benefit to that. These strides, I believe, are more about building running economy and longer strides than they are about, going full gas and having them be really anaerobic. So I would dial them back so that they are a little faster than your race pace, but not, maximal efforts by any means. But you're not, even if you do what you're saying, you're not sacrificing your aerobic gains because these are pretty low volume of these things.
Okay. Would you like to read the next one? Question from Daniel, Scott?
So Daniel says, question for the next Ask Evoke podcast. I heard a term called speed reserve used in the last Ask Evoke podcast when talking about Tom Evans. How would you recommend increasing this for an average ultra runner who is looking to get fast at their goal race of 100K distance? I seem to struggle on focusing on just getting overall volume versus maybe less volume, but have more speed work. And would love your thoughts. Thanks for the awesome
Mm.
podcast.
Well, this actually could be a good question for you, Scott. But I guess I'll just touch on it. Speed reserve, as I understand it, is the difference between basically the maximal speed you can run and uh, the speed you can run at your aerobic threshold. Um, is that
At
is
race
that what
pace,
this definition is?
yeah,
Yeah, race pace.
that's the
Essentially,
way
we're
I
going
think
off.
of it. And
Yeah,
it won't be like 100-meter sprint maximal speed, but
yeah.
maybe it would be like 5K speed versus 100K speed.
Yeah,
I
and
think of that.
in this context, thinking that they're mentioning a 100K race, yeah, I'd probably say that you're likely, going to be around your aerobic threshold there. But I mean, absolutely. I think the just to be a bit more concise here. So how would you recommend increasing this for an average ultra runner? I think the best place to start is likely hill sprints, to be honest, because there's a relatively low risk of injury. They're easier to work into your without having to sacrifice any real volume because as you mentioned earlier, Scott, they're not very metabolically demanding. And then from there, trying to figure out, maybe if your running economy is very poor, you could start working in some strides. Also, as we touched on the previous question, if you're really lacking in just your economy of movement, maybe thinking about some longer intervals could be worthwhile on flatter terrain rather than having your intensity uh, be on just purely trails. Um, yeah, what do you think about
Okay.
this one, Scott?
I completely agree with all of those. The only thing I might add would be you should consider going to a track and
Yeah.
training on a track. I know it's boring, not as boring as a treadmill, but they're still kind of boring. But if you have access to a track, that's the best place to improve running economy. And there's lots of different interval protocols that could be done with this. But I'll just give you an example that I use a lot with ultra runners, and that is we start with 10 by 1 kilometer, and we're trying to keep blood lactates low. So with these people, we generally are having them checking their blood lactate between these 1 kilometer repetitions, and we're trying to keep the lactate in the 2.5 to 3 millimole range, so that it's still very aerobic. Um, and with someone like Tom, he could do those at about a 3-minute kilometer pace. Then the checking the lactate takes maybe a minute and a half. So then he's off to the next one. And I have just seen this work so well with so many ultra runners to help them. This is way faster than he's going to be running in his race. And maybe for you, it's more like, a 5 minutes or 6-minute kilometer. That's fine, doesn't matter. But something that, is aerobically fast, um, especially for an ultra runner where, you know, we well, probably most people know my thoughts on this whole notion of VO2 max training, but not a big believer in it. But ultra running a race, races that last several hours, you're never going to get anywhere close to VO2 max effort, intensity. Or if you do, it's going to be a very bad or short race for you. And so building speed at an aerobic level while you're still pretty aerobic is, I think, one of the most important things for ultra runners. So we include these through almost most of the building season, leading into the racing season. And even this is something we can continue if there, if we have several weeks to a couple of months between races, we go back to this type of training. And the way we've done it, I think has worked quite well. Leif has also done the same thing with people he coaches, is we start with this 10x1. And then once that's sustainable and feels reasonable, then we move to 6x2 kilometers, but done at the same pace that you were doing the 1 kilometer runs at. And we're looking for the same lactates or lower. And often we see the lactates getting lower because the fitness is going up, aerobic capacity goes up. And then we often will finish that building cycle. And maybe we get 2 or 3 of each of these workouts, but we'd finish off with 3x5 kilometers, again, done at the same pace that you started the 1 kilometer running at, with, again, similar or lower lactates. I've just found that to be a very effective way, because a lot of, I coached a fellow who was extremely good on uphills. I mean, he was going to some of the sky races and like in Norway or these crazy big climbs, and he'd be the first one to the top of the hill. But then when they got on gentler terrain, everybody else takes off at a 6 minute mile pace. And this guy, he can only run 6 minute miles for a mile. And so he just didn't have, so that's a lack of speed reserve. So this is a good way to build some speed reserve, especially for races like the 100K. Hope that helps, Daniel. Hey, folks, we're going to call it take a rest after this. We still have another, what did I just say, 10 or 11 questions that came in for this month. And I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but we won't forget them. They will get moved on to next month's podcast. So either we have to give shorter, less interesting answers, or people have to give shorter questions to us. But well, thanks a lot, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, Leif, for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And we will see you all next month.